Shotguns.
And I'm definitely excited to meet you all. Just looking over the participants, I see that there are about 7 people here right now. And so, considering that we have a small group, along with the presentation I've prepared, I like for everybody to participate, to get the questions that you have, to understand what your needs are, so that in addition to the information that I'm presenting, I can make sure that I'm presenting information that is relevant to each one of you. So I'll give you a task to start with. If you know how to use that little chat box, go ahead and type in one of the major questions that you have about either homeschooling or about African centered education into the chat box now. And then during the presentation, I'll make sure to go through and to answer each one of your questions as well. All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation, but I'll be looking for those questions from all of you as well. And the topic that Brother Kuji Shafalia asked me to speak on today is education in black and white. And, thankfully, I had been preparing materials for this presentation for the past 11 years as an African centered educator, as a homeschooler. So I'm definitely very excited to share some of those resources and thoughts with all of you today. And, I do want participation, feedback from all of you. So definitely use that chat box along the way. Now we're going to start with talking about, what makes African-centered homeschooling unique, right? The topic that he asked me to present on is what's the difference between public school education and what we call African-centered education, right? Now, at this time, there are only a small pool of parents across the world who really consider themselves to be African centered and therefore see the need for African centered education. Those of you who are in this group right now, you may say that you're African centered, that you're looking for that for your children, but there are so many people that, wouldn't even know what African centered education is or why it's relevant to them or to their children. They do want their children, however, to have the best education. And if they understood how an African centered school or curriculum could accomplish that, then of course they would make the investment to enroll their children into those programs. They need to know that their children will have a greater sense of self and therefore higher academic scores, responsibility to family, community, and the world. They need to know that their children will still receive the academic education on par with a public school, plus have knowledge of their history, their culture, in many cases, agriculture, nature, an introduction to African languages such as Swahili, Basaba, in addition to Spanish and French in many African schools, principles that will increase their moral standards, their human interactions. And in many cases, they'll learn healthy lifestyles and physical fitness as well. All of the African centered schools that I've participated with as an educator or as a curriculum designer have always included those things within the curriculum. So there may be a few schools that are still developing their program to that level, but those things are generally indicative of the programming available at African centered schools. Now, most mainstream parents are not going to just understand what Mayad or Basava means, but they do understand proven increase in reading level within the first 6 months, which is a typical result within African centered schools, right? So when we talk about those differences between public education and African centered education, that's a major difference. Seeing that increase within reading levels. Also, if you think about the term eldership, which is again common across the board in African centered schools, many of us may not understand, like, okay, what is eldership? If you ask a 21-year-old parent in Sunnyside, Houston, what eldership is, they may not know, but they will understand, that their children will learn to respect themselves, their community, and their world while practicing respect, reverence for their parents, their grandparents, and those who have led the way within their communities, right? Now, there are statistics and there are charts available on the developmental psychomotor potential of our children. I say Black children, but we could say African, with a K, which represents all of our children across the African diaspora, at this time. Um, but if we look at Dr. Amos Wilson's Awakening the Natural Genius in Black Children, if you all are familiar with that book, on page 99, Dr. Wilson lists traits that children should exhibit within early childhood. And I'm actually going to see if I can make this presentation a little bit bigger on the screen here. One second. Here we go. And I see that we have new people joining us. For those who have just joined, please send me your questions that you have about homeschooling or about African-centered education in the chat box, and I'll be sure to address those questions before we end the presentation. So these are the traits that Dr. Amos Wilson lists in Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children as being important for our children to learn within their curriculum, right? And it could be curriculum within a school or curriculum in the sense of what we're presenting to them as parents, right? Respect for adults, independence, persistence, curiosity, experimentation, discovery, a universal sense of justice, respect for order, social interests, good manners, sensitivity to persons and environment, self-esteem, family and community pride, commitment to promises made or contracts, love of learning, ethnic cultural identity, general care for humans of all races, and reverence for life. This is the list of the things that are most important for children to learn. And we have to ask ourselves, are they learning all of these things within public school? You may be teaching them these things at home, but are they being reinforced within their school environment? And if not, then how can you either create or put them into a program where they're able to gain these traits? We need to be encouraged, and all parents need to be encouraged to ask themselves, all of our African parents, across the US and across the world, are our children learning to establish these traits in a public school? Are they really going to be able to reach their full potential within a public school? Statistics can be presented to demonstrate the past failure of the public schools specifically to our children. When we look at those recorded grades and the recorded conduct of African American students, how do they rate in contrast to their peers? When you look at those different reports and so on, what biases were used both in the teaching and in the grading process, right? And so at this point, just for a moment, I'd like to get a little bit of feedback from the group. Brother Alias, are they able to unmute themselves?
Sure.
I see that, brother, is it Rogish?
Rogish.
Rogish, I see that you were able to unmute yourself. So can you tell me just for a moment some of what you've seen within those reports when they talk about our children?
Well, usually when they talk about our children, it's always them being at a deficit, and that they're not. It's not that they're not making a grade. Most of the time, they're not even interested in the class to begin with, so they're going to check out, and their potential never really gets tapped. They compare them to the other children, who have different cultures, different realities, and the thing is, they don't interact with our children through their cultural perspective of engaging reality, and probably a whole lot more that they're dealing with just being inside of such a space that clearly don't value them. And when you have a teacher mess up your name the whole year, and they're a teacher. Like, yo, you mess up the name the whole year. You're a teacher. Don't you know syllables and letters and words and stuff? Yeah, okay. So our children dealing with a
Right,
lot.
right, right, exactly. And so not only are the reports biased in the sense of the information that's being presented, but as you shared, in many cases, students may not be interested in the material that's being presented in the first place, or it may not be presented in a way that's culturally engaging for our children. Later in the presentation, we're going to go over some of the characteristics of African centered pedagogy. While curriculum is what you teach, pedagogy is the way that you teach. And our children have certain genetic traits that are predisposed to certain types of pedagogy, such as call and response. Now, some of you may be familiar. Sister Adeline, what did you say?
Sorry, I forgot to mute.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, so call and response, for example. So some of you may be familiar with the call and response out of Ghana, which is where the teacher says, I go, and the students say, I may. Now, I've never had a child that has not responded to that, even in a public school setting when I taught in the public schools. Has anyone used that before with their children? And you can just kind of raise your hand. There's a button to raise your hand, or you can leave a comment in the chat box saying if you've used that.
Hello?
Yes, Sister Nikki, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I'm not a parent, but in terms of the call and response, that's in our music as well.
Yes.
Hip hop, jazz, blues. So, I guess that could be a way of teaching our children too through our music. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, Sister Nikki. Using the music is a great tool to teach our children. And I'll just demonstrate the call and response technique that I generally use with my students with Brother Rogish. If you could unmute your microphone again, we'll do a demonstration.
Will do.
Okay, so when I say I go, you say I may, okay? I go.
I may.
I go.
I may.
I go.
I may.
And that's what you do to catch the children's attention. So even when I was teaching in a public school, Sister Asante, go ahead and mute your microphone, please, unless you had something to share about that.
I'm fine. What's up?
Okay, go ahead and mute your microphone, Sister Asante.
Trying to listen to you.
Oh, you said you had a comment?
When was the last time I spoke to Brenda? I don't know, a couple weeks ago. Why?
Oh, okay. Whoever is doing technical assistance, please mute Sister Asante, please. So yes, that's how we do I go, I may, which is to catch the attention of the student and then to move forward with them from there in terms of the educational materials, the objectives that are being presented. If children are being told within the classroom, let's say they're in a classroom somewhere in Chicago, New York, wherever, and to catch their attention, the teacher is telling them, shut up, sit down. That comes across differently than I go and I may, right? And it affects the psychology differently. So, we have to think about how those things weigh in within the classroom and within the approach that's being used, right? African children need an African-centered approach to be able to reach their greatest potential. Now, not only do our children have equivalent, but it's been proven in testing that we have more advanced early psychomotor development in comparison to Caucasian children. There was a test done called the Giselle test for early intelligence, and that was documented in Dr. Amos Wilson's Awakening the Natural Genius in Black Children. That's on page 35 and 36. It shows that we scored higher on mental and motor tests as infants in the Kuyu case study. That's on page 36 and 37, as well as in other forms of testing as well up to age 6, right? So how is it that our children are being recorded as having consistently lower test scores than their peers, reported as having supposedly higher rates of criminal activity if they have a head start from the beginning, a natural head start? Why would we be lagging behind, as the paperwork presents? And even more importantly, what can be done about it, right? So these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. When we talk about African-centered education, African-centered schools, some parents are thinking like, oh, that's just, a Black thing. That's just a fad. Our children are going to be racist. They're going to be separatist, X, Y, Z. It's post-racial now, as Raven Simone said, right? I don't need to spend money giving my children, that type of education, but that's not what it is. This is a holistic, personalized, academic, and cultural experience that our children need in order to be enabled to establish a new paradigm for the intellectual and the social development of Africans globally, for all the Black people around the world. Now, not only the statistics show that there is an imbalance when it comes to our children, but our children are also being cut out of the picture when it comes to presentation of historical achievement of their predecessors, in addition to creating a new element of cultural amalgamation that can result in a greater loss of self and community. And I'm just going to check the questions here before I move forward with that information. I see, and you all can see the questions here on the screen as well. How much certification is required for homeschooling? We'll talk about homeschooling later in the presentation in detail, Brother Rogish. Let's see, we hide it in the homeschool setting as well as at home, just being a family. And if you could just respond to that, BSK, in the chat box. Do you mean that we hide our culture, that we hide, from ourselves? What do you mean when you say we hide it? They feed them redundant, irrelevant information that causes children to disengage and become disinterested in learning altogether. True. Sister Nikki said, may I ask a question? Yes, Sister Nikki, please go ahead and type your question into the chat box, and I'll be sure to answer it in just a few minutes when I check the chat box again. So I'm glad everyone is engaged, because now we're moving forward with why this is so urgent. So there was a new law passed back in May 2010, which has, definitely been on the books for a while now, considering that it's 2020 and it's actually been worse since then. This law was passed changing the social studies curriculum in Texas K-12 schools. Now, the thing about it is that the textbooks in Texas and California determine the textbooks that are used in the rest of the country, in the United States, right? So when you have a major change within the textbooks in Texas, that affects the majority of states across the nation. And that's why this is so important. The State Board of Education felt that the conservative and Christian history of America was being underrepresented and pushed for changes such as replacing references to the slave trade with the Atlantic triangular trade. And they're definitely not replacing that with the African Holocaust, right? Now, they removed Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail from the textbook. These are just a couple of the changes that were made. If you go online and you Google changes to the textbooks, in Texas, there are plenty of websites about that. If you look at things that have been taken out, things that have been added, they wanted to put more focus on that conservative history, make America great again, right? And so in that process, they've been cutting out our history, which there really wasn't enough of our history in the first place, right? So how does the curriculum and pedagogy advance and cultivate our children that's being used in the public schools? And not only that, but there are safety issues. There was a school out of California called Britain Elementary, and they abandoned the RFID tracking badges for their students. They reported that, the school was treating their children like livestock or shipment pallets, and that it was demeaning, that it violated the students' privacy, put them in danger to computer hacker pedophiles who could, pinpoint the children's location and be able to find them, right? Now, these same badges that were abandoned as a danger and a violation of privacy in California have been introduced to 28,000 Texas students with expansion to other places as well. This report is from 2004, so it's literally hundreds of thousands of children at this point who have received these RFID tracking badges. Like, I mean, your children might have them. You could check. Like if your children are in school, if they have those credit card type of badges that they wear, on their
That's
necks
what
with
it
their
is.
uniforms.
They put it
Those
in. They
are
put it in the
RFID
ID.
tracking badges, and those pinpoint your children's location. And yes, they can be hacked. So it is not only an issue of culture, not only an issue of history, not only an issue of biased teachers, but it's also an issue of safety when it comes to public schools. Okay, and I see a comment here from Suzette Rose. It's very important that we do not turn our children ever to others to teach our children the basics. We must not get caught up in monetary acquisition that we only interact with our children 1 or 2 hours a day. We must know ourselves first and then give our knowledge to that children. Teach your children yourself first. Beautiful comment, Suzette. And I think Brother Rogish had a comment as well about the RFID tracking badges. Go ahead, Brother Rogish.
I was saying you're correct. They do put it in the ID.
Yes, absolutely. So, that's definitely an issue for our children. Let's just move forward here. Now, of course, I could tell you like, okay, everybody take your children out, homeschool them, put them in an African-centered school, but not everyone is going to do that. We know that not everyone is going to do that. Maybe you feel like you can't afford to take your children out of the public school because you have to go to work at a certain time and you're on a low income, so you can't afford to put them into one of the private African-centered schools, and there's not a free African-centered charter school in your area. And so you feel like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You're like, okay, this is good information, but this is not something that's viable for me right now. And that's okay. You may even feel like your children have been successful in the public school, right? Or that you were when you were a child, and so your children can be too. And I can definitely understand all of that. But, if you are going to leave your children within that system, then you need to know what the weaknesses of the system are and get involved, and that's still going to take time. There's no way that we can be parents without taking time. Parenting is a job within itself. And so there's no way that we can be completely hands off, in that process. It's not going to happen, if we want our children to grow up, and be well developed, right? So we need to be on those school boards. We need to be involved in the committees. We need to be at the meetings, swaying the curriculum and the programs to represent our children, our culture, our interests, and make sure that our children are being taken care of, as adequately as possible within that system, right? So definitely, if you are going to keep your children in public school, then you have to make sure that you have an extremely high level of involvement, right? Because otherwise, we know that they use the 3rd and 4th grade math and reading scores to track children's prison, to try to decide how many prisons to build, and then targeting them unfairly at a later time. How many African Americans have been incarcerated for marijuana, or even under the 3 strikes rule, incarcerated for marijuana and then receiving 2 more strikes and getting an extended amount of time or life in prison. And now you have people all over the world creating multi-billion-dollar industries from the same plant. But those who had the marijuana charges are not exonerated. They cannot get their time back, right? How is it that I know people personally in my peer group, African Americans within my peer group who have been arrested for jaywalking on the college campus that I attended, the University of Houston, literally arrested for walking on the wrong side of the street. And I can assure you that, their Caucasian peers in those dorm rooms were doing a whole lot worse than jaywalking, right? So when you look at what our children are being tracked for, when you look at what their plans are for our children, we have to make sure that we have our own plans for them, right? And we have to make sure that our plans supersede their plans. So yes, if you are going to keep your children in public school, make sure that you're involved. I have taught in public schools, and I could tell you some stories about some things that I heard said from white teachers about Black and Hispanic children. I've heard a white teacher, one of my colleagues when I was working at a charter school in Houston, say that certain children were not fixable, that we didn't need to waste our time and resources on them, and wanting to give we had someone coming in like a coordinator who was supposed to give support to a certain number of children. And they intentionally did not want to give the support to some of the children, specifically children who were Black and Hispanic, because they could only give support to a few children per grade level on the budget. And they made comments, about our children and about, their brown brothers and sisters, that, they weren't worth it, and wanting to direct those resources towards children that looked a certain way because of their biases. And I had to fight to be able to provide, a decent education when I was working there, to our children, to constantly fight for it, right? So we really have to think about what our plans are, again, for our children, and how those can supersede plans that the system may have, for our children instead, okay? Now, of course, homeschooling is a great option, and you don't have to do it alone. We'll talk about that in detail later in the presentation. To start with, here are some resources: National Black Home Educators, Black Alliance for Educational Options. You can look up those resources. HSLDA, that's the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And you can find all of the homeschooling laws for your state on hslda.org. Or if you just, put HSLDA into your search bar. This link, I meant to leave off the ING, but AfricanCenteredHomeschool.com, AfricanCenteredHomeschool.com. Homeschooling is also a viable option for us, as an alternative. You can look up the Afrocentric Homeschoolers Association, National Black Home Educators, all of these resources. Also, the Council of Independent Black Institutions. I couldn't find their website anymore. I don't know if it's temporarily down, but you can still contact them through their phone number or on social media. They provide biannual conferences, conventions, a teacher development institute, and consultations and technical assistance to those operating or even to open African-centered schools. Like if you want to spearhead that process and open a homeschool co-op or an independent school. So I'm just going to check for questions before I move forward. I know that Sister Nikki had a question. If you want to type that into the chat box, Sister Nikki. It says, time, energy, and effort must be invested, from Brother Taharka. Yes, so true. Sister Nikki, if you're still there, if you wanted to unmute yourself and ask your question, you can do that now. Okay, I think she's typing her question into the chat box. Okay, so let's see. Sister Nikki said, given that our children have a higher propensity for learning per the studies you mentioned, they have to deal with constant hostility and gaslighting from white female teachers and white, Asian, East Indian students with abuse of the N-word and name calling personally against them. So yes, that's true. I have personally, I could tell you stories, and we don't have enough time to get into it, but I'll tell you a couple things that I experienced working at a public charter school in Houston. Um, when you talk about white female teachers and how they address our children, right? I had one student. He was 14 years old, African American student, and the white female teachers constantly talked about him negatively in the teachers' lounge. I felt like I was constantly having to defend him to the other teachers because there were not many African American teachers at this particular school. I won't name the school. Um, and along with that, I remembered that I actually recorded him on my phone, like on my work phone one day in my classroom, and recorded his behavior and showed it to the other teachers. And they said that they couldn't believe it, that it was like a different person. And so they said they wanted to come see it in person, like that I had like staged a video or something, right? And so they came into the classroom and monitored us, and they were still like, I can't believe that he has this behavior in your classroom. He's jumping all over the place, yelling out song lyrics, doing all these other things in our classrooms, not paying attention, distracting other students. How did you get him to behave this way? And literally, like, when I started teaching there, he did have, some behavior issues during the first few days. But I noticed that he had behavior issues. And for me as a teacher, I'm thinking that shows that you're a leader. You want attention and you're getting it because you're a leader. And so let's direct that attention in a positive way. So I had him start helping me present my PowerPoint to the class, going around to make sure the other children had materials. Whenever I would do like a activity like popcorn or something, where you go around and have the children answer questions, I would have him to lead it, right? If the children were getting some kind of treat or prize, he would hand it out. He was kind of like my TA within the classroom, and his behavior was perfect. He was articulate. Everything was perfect, in what he was doing in my class. And the other teachers were treating him like trash, like a throwaway. So that's the reason why they were still having so many issues with him. After I stopped working there, they ended up cutting out my class because I was teaching writing and it was no longer on the standardized test. So they just cut it out of the budget, cut the class completely. And I was still getting group texts, from the other teachers. And after I was gone, from the school, I saw a text that said this same student, they had him running up and down the stairwells as a punishment, for something that he had done. They were like, we made him run up and down the stairs, 10 times. Like this was like a 3-story school, and they were giving the children corporal punishment for actions that, were created by, teachers doing things that were not right in the first place. One of the teachers that they asked me to go in and assist, a white female teacher, as Nikki shared, she was actually showing Trump videos to the students during the study hall time, the homeroom time, to try to convince them that they needed to look at Trump in a different way. And she had a Tea Party flag hanging on the wall in her classroom, right? These are real stories. When they asked me to come in and assist her and I saw what she was doing, I turned it off and I turned it on hip hop videos. I'm like, if these children can watch whatever, obviously whatever during homeroom, since you have them watching this, then we're about to watch Lauryn Hill, right? we're about to look up, some positive hip hop videos instead of the stuff that you have them watching. Like, it really broke my heart, to see how the children were being treated, right? And that's not an anomaly. That's common within the system. As far as the use of the N-word, that happens not just in the US, but also abroad. You know, I have children that I work with who are in other countries right now, such as Qatar, um, who have experienced bullying with being called the N-word from other children. And there's no repercussion, you know, from the teacher. And so, yes, all of these microaggressions do affect our children's ability to wholly engage as a student. It does isolate them emotionally. And so, Sister Nikki asks, how can a parent bridge this disconnect so that the child student is not disillusioned in the long term? Well, I mean, of course, homeschooling your child or putting them into African centered school would be the best option, you know, but outside of that, you know, you have to be super involved. I mean, um, some people say that, you know, the public schools and that type of bullying, that type of exposure, you know, gives the children life lessons. You know, it makes them tougher. But, you know, of course, you could put a flower in the oven to make it tougher, but it's not going to help it grow, right? So, you know, we have to think about those things. Now let's talk about incongruence. African American underachievement, and this is kind of like what you were mentioning, Sister Nikki, is the result of two cultures being incongruent. Specifically, the asynchrony between the culture of the mainstream school and the culture of the African American home. You know, that's exactly what you were saying. And this quote is by Peter C. Morrell. It leads to misperceptions of our children's true ability and miscommunications that generally degrade the quality of their educational experience in comparison to their peers, right? It is an anti-self educational model. You know, we have all girls schools, all women's colleges, you know, religious schools and so on, right? The purpose of African centered schools is the protection of a vulnerable group from violence of all sorts, essential stages of development during which they have few resources with which to combat this violence on their own. And Sister Nikki, that's like what you were saying about the microaggressions, right? So of course you have, you know, the Native American children placed at the center of instruction in Native American schools, girls placed at the center of instruction in all girls schools, right? But where are our children placed at the center of instruction? That happens within our African-centered schools, within our African-centered curriculum. Also, you know, in terms of looking at the characteristics of African-centered education. And let me just go back here. I think there was a question or a comment here. Absolutely, there are incidents with teachers using the N-word, very much so. The characteristics of African-centered education, outside of it just being a way to address our history. You know, we know that, right? It is also learner centered and learner paced, meaning if your child is on a fifth grade level in math, a seventh grade level in reading, you know, and a fourth grade level in science, if they go to an African centered school, you're going to work with them based on their level within each of those subjects rather than just putting them all into one box. Either you perform or you don't perform, right? And so if they're not able to meet that standard, you know, they just get poor grades within the public schools. Like literally teaching at that charter school, they told me that I can receive disciplinary action if I spend more than 90 seconds with each student. So when students had questions, I could not spend more than 90 seconds with them, and that's common. The reason for that is because over the course of a school day, I had 180 students to work with. So if I spend more than 90 seconds with each student, then that is potentially endangering the other students from receiving the attention that they need. It's like showing favoritism, right? And so, I mean, I can understand it as a business model, but does it help our children? You know, them having 90 seconds from a teacher, is that going to give them what they need? You know, if they don't understand something, or are they going to be given different work so that they can catch up with it, right? I had students in the seventh grade who were 15 and 16 years old that teachers had given up on, right? So is that what we want for our children, or do we want a student-centered education for them? And if you do, then African-centered education is definitely the way to go for that. High opportunities for participation, group work, cultural discourse practices such as call and response, critical inquiry, use of cultural props, symbols, and characters, that represent us. So when you see that red, black, and green flag, that comes along with Black August, which we're celebrating this weekend, there's a history behind that. There's a history behind why, Marcus Garvey's wife, Amy Garvey, created that flag, along with him and, wrote the song, why she wrote the song to go with it. There's a history behind that, right? So when they see that flag and they learn that history, it is empowering to them. When they go to public school and they see the American flag hanging on the wall and they say the Pledge of Allegiance and they learn about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and the other owners of enslaved Africans within the United States that, they're taught to venerate within the curriculum, what is that affirming for them on the other hand, right? When they see that red, black, and green flag, they can learn the history and learn to become an entrepreneur, to develop independent solutions for problems that we face, not just as a community, as a nation, but also globally as Pan-African, like Marcus Garvey did, right? When they see the flag and they say the pledge within, the public schools, what is that affirming for them on the other hand, right? Oral performances are also a part of African-centered education, like explanations, narratives, presentations, other forms of public talk. They may, for example, do a speech by Malcolm X, in front of the class, or by Frederick Douglass, and so on, to practice orality, in addition to learning the material on paper, just using pen and paper. And I see there was a question. Let me see if I can see what the question was here. How do you engage parents in situations where their parenting may be incongruous with your teaching approach? I mean, if those parents have taken out the time and energy to put their children into an African-centered program, then they generally want to be incongruent, and they're willing to take actions to correct themselves. On a personal level, I work with students one-on-one and in groups, currently. And I had a student who started with me recently over the past couple of months. And she was in public school before. She's actually going to be in my program full-time now. But she had started pulling her hair out, beautiful little, African-American child. And she just started pulling out her hair to the point where she had bald patches because of being so stressed out within the school environment. This year, she's going to the 3rd grade. So she was in the 2nd grade experiencing that. And, her mom was getting frustrated with the situation, but also getting frustrated with her child. Feeling like, why are you pulling out your hair? Why can't you just perform? Why can't you just catch up? Why can't you just do the work? And, started yelling at the child, which was causing more anxiety, right? And so we talked about it. Like as a family, so to say. So me, the mom, the dad, the child, we all got on a video call together and we talked about it. We talked about, for the child, how does this make you feel? And she said, she feels sad when her mom yells at her, and, that also makes her start, wanting to pull out her hair, to hurt herself in that way. And the mom said, she didn't realize that she was contributing to that, with the way that she was responding to her, and that in order to solve that, she wanted her to spend more time with me and with other educators that could help her on the academic side, while her mom cultivated, the patience with her, and that she needed guidance, that she needed reminders, that she needed help and support with that. And that goes back to the whole thing about it taking a village, right? In many cases, the parents do want to correct themselves, especially if they're willing to take that step to put their child into a program, African-centered or anything that's individualized. And so we just have to have those conversations in a non-judgmental way, focused on making the changes necessary for the child involved. Because, I mean, none of us are above reproach. You know, none of us are perfect parents or perfect people, right? But we have to work together, you know, as teachers and students, you know, and as community to be able to make sure that all of our children's needs are met. Okay. Let's just go to the next slide here. I hope I answered your question. Now, when we talk about homeschooling, homeschooling does not require 8 hours a day. If you're working with younger children of elementary age, you know, they only need a few hours a day of homeschool because they're receiving more individualized attention. They're not within a classroom where they're getting that 90 seconds of attention, you know, along with, you know, just being lectured and having to try to keep up with it, whether they understand it or not, right? And you don't have to do it alone. There are an abundance of resources and like-minded parents. If you look up, oh, thank you. If you look up cooperatives within your area, co-ops, or collectives within your zip code, there are a lot of them even that are starting now because of the pandemic. And there are ones that have been going for a very long time, okay? I have an online co-op, Whole Living Academy, with great teachers. You can check it out at wholelivingacademy.com. And, you know, I'll give that information at the end as well. But there are plenty of others that I'll recommend too, because I want you to have choices. And I'll actually show you a list of some of the African-centered co-ops that are available that you can put your children in just a moment. Your children can also benefit from, you know, different online resources, which I'll share with you, and hybrid programs. And if we can get a time check, please. Brother Alias, how much time do I have left here? Or Brother Rogish, can you do a time check, please? What time is it right now?
I wasn't too sure when we started. It is Central 11:32, so that make I think 12:32 for y'all. But you sound a little country when you said y'all that time. I don't know where you at.
Well, I'm from Texas, but I'm actually in Belize
right.
right now. I'm in San Ignacio, Belize. We've been here for 4 years, but yes, I'm a little country.
Already.
But you said that it's 12:32 Eastern time.
12:32 Eastern. Yeah.
Okay, so we have another 45 minutes. Okay, perfect. We'll have time to cover everything. And I see that there was a comment typed here into the chat box as well. Brother Taharka asked a question. Okay, perfect question, Brother Taharka, because we're going to get into all of that within this part of the presentation, okay? So when we talk about self-paced programs, just make sure, when I talked about being learner-centered, if you're homeschooling, take a learner-centered approach, please. Like if your child is on the 3rd grade level in math and they're in the 7th grade, be honest with yourself and with that child, okay? Give them 3rd grade reading comprehension materials initially, and then they'll quickly, every couple months, build up from there with the resources that you're providing to get up to grade level over the course of the school year, and then to go from there to being above grade level. This approach always works. It always works. I've worked with so many children over the past 11 years. And when you don't go back and fill in those gaps, then it just continues to create problems for moving forward. You know, sometimes our ego gets involved with it, right? It's like, you know, oh, they're a little behind, but I'm still going to give them, you know, these 10th grade reading materials. You know, I'm going to ask them to read the autobiography of Malcolm X, you know, even though they're on a 3rd grade reading level right now. They might need to read the autobiography of Harriet Tubman on a 3rd or 4th grade level first, and then build up from there over the school year, you know, to get to that point where next year they can read the autobiography of Malcolm X and understand it, because you've built their reading comprehension, their vocabulary, and so on. The same thing with math, right? So meet your children where they are. And that way they'll be able to have a strong foundation for moving forward. In some cases, I've worked with students that have jumped 3 or 4 grade levels within a summer because we go back to where the gaps were and then move forward from there. You know, I recently had a student who is getting ready to start Algebra 2 for 11th grade. And when I first tested her this year, she was on a 5th, 6th grade math level. And so I thought that we would have to, you know, work throughout the year to be able to get her caught up with Algebra 2, right? But when I went back and just started addressing some of those gaps that she had gotten along the way, answering her questions that had never been answered within the public school, giving her that personal support, it was literally like not even a month before she could start doing algebra problems. And I'm like, what in the world? She's like, yeah, she's like, I just didn't have support from my teachers. We have a lot of students in the classroom and I had questions and there were certain things I didn't understand. And I was working with her 3 times a week, right? So just by going through that process with her, she was able to start doing Algebra 2 work successfully. And I was like, I can't believe it. Like, I thought it would take the whole school year and you're already doing it, right? So definitely use that learner-centered approach. And I see that there was a question here. Oh, definitely, that is chronic neglect, right? But that's what happens. Our children are chronically neglected within many of the public schools. There are a few good ones, right? But in many cases, they are chronically neglected because we have a lot of first-year teachers. We have a lot of teachers that have too many students in the classroom, up to 50 students in the classroom for one teacher. In most cases, they have about 30 students, right? And now with the pandemic, what's happening? We're transitioning to online, where they're only receiving 1 live session per week in many cases, and everything else they have to do on their own on Schoology, you know, just watching videos and completing assignments. And I've seen those systems, you know, with my students. And in many cases, you know, the teachers haven't taken the time to make sure that the videos go with the assignments that they're presenting. So this is a different year. This 2020-2021 school year, we need to take special care of our children because however, you know, neglectful, whatever issues that we had with the education system before, it's only amplified now that the children are not even in the building, right? But it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to learn to provide education to our own children. Okay, so let's go to the next one here. So with homeschooling, you want high opportunities for participation. Talk to your kids, talk to your children. Don't let them just complete the work without talking about it. You know, yeah, you can put them on Khan Academy, you know, and say like, do this all day. But if they're not talking to you, then there's something that they're missing, right? The student should be doing most of the work within any given lesson. So, for example, if you're having a lesson about Frederick Douglass, then you're not just, you know, preaching to your child about Frederick Douglass for an hour and then asking them like, okay, so what did you learn? Because in most cases, depending on how old your child is, they may need to do some type of activity or answer a question every 3 or 4 minutes to be able to retain the information, right? So, you know, you may have them do like a scavenger hunt, for example, where they look online for certain materials to go along with the reading that you've done together, present the information that they found in the scavenger hunt. You know, you talked about offline activities, putting together art projects, poster boards, right? Like those things are still viable, creating their own board games. You know, that's something that you can do offline. Spending time outdoors, you know, just going into the backyard if need be and talking about what you learned, you know, taking a walk around the block and talking about what you learned. You know, if you did a lesson on Asante, you can go take a walk to the park and, you know, just let your child talk about Asante, right? And that not only provides affirmation in terms of retaining the information that they gave, but it also gives them that outdoor time that is so important. You can also have them to self-manage their portfolio. Look on HSLDA, which is the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, to see what the homeschooling laws are within your state. And then, and in most cases, you may need to put together 10 pages per semester into the portfolio to present to the state. If your state keeps track of those things. In Texas, they don't. But, in California and in certain other states, do. And so you can have your child to self-manage that, for example, right, as a way to let them participate and be engaged. Group work is also great. If you have co-ops in your area or a community center, a group like that, then you can involve your child or your children. But if not, then you can either put one together and start a book club, or start an African history club or an entrepreneurship club or a stock investment club, right? Or they can plan, write, and record a short film together, or write a book together, all of these things. Lacking any of that, there are definitely companies like OutSchool, for example, that provide group classes at an affordable price, online. My program, Whole Living Academy, the students would be working in groups of 15. If you hear some background noise, as I shared, I'm in Belize right now, so there is a tortilla truck passing by, selling hot tortillas that are ready for lunchtime, because it's lunchtime right now. So, but yes, you can use OutSchool. You can use WholeLivingAcademy.com. You can use Aya Educational Institute, a very great school founded by Brother Mazimoyo and his wife, right? So those cultural discourse practices we talked about. Brother Rogish, I go. I may.
I may.
I go.
I may.
I go.
I may.
All right. So, we see that cultural discourse practice, even if I have my niece here. You can keep playing with your toys, but when I say I go, you say I may, okay? I go. I
I
go.
may. I may.
All right now. You like that? She said yes. So, asking your children critical thinking questions about what they're reading or watching. If you all are familiar with the work of Howard Zinn, in terms of those books that address some of the lies that have been perpetuated within the public school curriculum, he was not an African, but he did great work. And at this point, he has passed on, and all those materials that he created are available for free. So if you can visit Zen Ed Project, then you can access lessons for your children about Tulsa 1921 with lesson plans and activities, right? About they had some things on there about Reconstruction era, and about how we were promised the 40 acres and a mule, but then that was actually in some cases taken back, and in some cases never given, and hundreds of other lessons like that are on the system, right, for free. You can use them either within your homeschool curriculum, or if you have a co-op or a group that you're doing, you can use all of those materials for free. And if there's anything that you want to adapt within there, then, of course, you can do that as well. So that Zen Ed Project, if you want to put that into your notes. Use cultural props within your home, if you're doing homeschooling, or within your classroom if you're doing a co-op, or, something like that. And so as I look around, we have various things kind of, scattered around the place. Even some of the paintings that I've done here, in the house that, have African images, right? And you just want to have those things so that, children have that cultural grounding, right? Even the dress that I have on right now, this dress I actually got in Ghana. back in 2011. The head wrap that I have on, I think that this came from Cameroon, if I remember correctly. So, all of those things are constantly affirming, our culture and our history to our children, right? Use of movies, cartoons like Kirikou, which is, an excellent series of films. So that, they're gaining a cultural grounding from the media that they're consuming as well. If they're not watching anything outside of Disney movies, then they're missing something. If they're not reading anything except for Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast, they're missing something. They need to know who Anansi is, right? Anansi the spider, and yeah, Anansi, and when we say Anansi, and we say, how Anansi, he wanted to eat all the food within the village, right? And so, he cast his web, so that he would know when the food was ready from the rabbit's house, and from the grasshopper's house, and from the monkey's house. And then when all of the food got ready, he told them to just, pull his strings, pull his web, right? And when they did that, they ended up pulling his legs to make them long. And that's the reason why spiders have long legs to this day, right? And so, yeah, honey, hold on. Let me tell them about this. But yeah, I know that you have a lot of Anansi stories to tell. The one about him eating the grandma's pot of beans and rice while she was gone. And he burned himself. And that's the reason why spiders don't have hair on their heads to this day. Right? Right, exactly. And I mean, this is a perfect example, right? Because when I talk about Anansi, my niece, she's 8 years old, she gets excited, right? Instead of me talking about Cinderella and she's getting excited, and she's like, oh yeah, that white girl, when she followed that magic lady's advice, she got a man, It's like, she was able to get out of poverty and she got a man to take care of her. I mean, what is that really teaching our children, right? We need to teach them about strong Black families, and there are plenty of examples of that, not only throughout history, but within our communities that we can include in what we're introducing to them, and introduce them to stories that, are from our history and from our culture, such as Anansi, such as Kirikou, writing reports, doing oral presentations, and when we talk about approaches to homeschooling, you can take the traditional approach, you can take the collective or cooperative approach, or you can mix them together, and we'll get into that. So with the traditional approach, you would decide which subjects you want your children to study, secure books and worksheets in these subjects, combine instruction with self-guided exercises, independent projects, include online components, but I think it was Brother Taharka who asked about, what do you do this offline? And we'll talk about some of those things further on, but, first of all, outdoor play and exercise, those are primary. Offline reading, having books in the house, my son is a little bit older now. I had been homeschooling him since he was 5 and he's 16 now, but my niece, who also lives with me, she's 8 and she's constantly going and picking off books that are supposedly supposed to be way above her grade level, to sit here and read, right? And so if I just grab one here, here's Jamaica Kincaid, at the bottom of the river, right? Here's Grandmothers of the Light, a medicine woman's source book. One of my elders gave this to me before she passed on. Let's see what else we have here. We have The Healing Wisdom of Africa by Malidoma Patrice Somé, and many other books. Even this is by one of my good friends, Naturopathic Reiki 1, Opening the Way by Dr. K. Akua Gray, right? So you see the imagery, there on the front of the book, And my niece, she's 8 years old, and she came from a different type of household before she came to live with me, and she's constantly going and picking these books, from the shelf, and reading them. Yes, ma'am. She's constantly going to go pick those books off the shelf. She's doing it now because she's like, oh, you're talking about it, and I need to go get a book. So those are the types of offline activities that our children can be involved with. And of course, she does have children's books as well, right? But when you have books that you're reading in addition to that are available in the house, you'll find that eventually not only do your children read their books, but they also read your books. And if you're not reading, they're not going to be as interested in reading. So make sure that you make time for that. If you're not exercising, they're not going to be as interested in exercising, right? If you're constantly just on the computer, on the phone, then, or watching, Netflix or whatever, then that's going to be how it reflects within them. You're going to, why you always playing that game? Why you always watching that show, right? Why you always on the phone, right? But at the same time, you constantly on your phone and you checking Instagram, you trying to see, how many likes you got on that post, and that's okay. But you want to make sure that you're balancing that with taking time out yourself to read, to exercise, to plan a business if you don't have one already, to do all of those things, right? You want to make sure that you're taking time to do those things so that you're inspiring your children in the process. And then having them fellowship with other children at the community center, after school programs, find co-ops in your area, give them that time. If they're interested in sports, give them their sports, put them on a team. Some of the schools actually have auxiliary programs where, although the child is not enrolled in the school, you can still enroll them within the sport, right? But it is better if you can find a community organization to do that, because in many cases, there's still some odd influences, especially when you get to the high school level, with them being, directly on the public school sports team and so on. I mean, we know, if you're in your 30s, if you're in your 40s, and you think back to when you were in high school, you can remember some of the influences that you received during that time. If you're in your 20s, then even better, right? So if you can find, those small organizations, and so on, that can give your children that initial moral, academic, and cultural foundation, before they get to the collegiate level, and they may not have a choice about, being around so many different types of peer pressure and so on, then they'll be able to navigate that space a lot better, once they get there. And I'll get to questions in just a moment. Go to the next slide here. So in terms of digital tools, these are some of the resources that you can use, and I'll give you a moment to look over them. But all of this will also be sent out as well. So I'll just give you a few seconds to take notes, to look over these materials. Okay, so when you use your computer or your laptop, you can research on various sites, such as Smithsonian, Khan Academy, Code Academy. Khan Academy has all of the academic subjects, really from like kindergarten through college, right? Code Academy is specifically for learning various coding languages programs. Scratch, we'll actually look at that again later. They can learn coding as well as animation for free, right? The 3M kits are like solar power, water purification, and so on. And you can order those, online very affordably. I'll give you a website later on that you can use. And then, of course, doing apprenticeships within their communities. And then field trips to places like, the Natural Science Museum in your area, the planetarium. I'll give you some information for an African, African American youth aerospace program that you can get them involved with for nearly for free. They have a program that they do every summer, and you only pay like $75 for the summer for your children to learn about aviation careers and take a real flight. And you'll have that information within this presentation as well. I am very involved with that organization, and here it is. And so I've flown, a plane, like a Cessna, on a few occasions. And my son has flown. The first time that he flew a plane was when he was, I think, 10 years old. And of course, he wasn't alone. He was supported by an instructor. But it was still a great experience for him because he was very into planes when he was younger. Now he's more so into programming. He still likes aviation, but he spends hours a day, just developing like different apps and games and so on. And that's where his energy is now. But we got involved with this organization and people associated with it. This is the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals, and you can find their information. I believe it's obap.org. I can actually just click this to go to the site and show you for a moment. They have an aerospace program that is across the country, and yes, it is obap.org, obap.org. Now, their program is across the country. So this means that, whether you're in New York, whether you're in Delaware, whether you're in California, Texas, they have these ACE academies set up strategically across the country so that the greatest percentage of our children can attend them. And this organization was founded by Black aerospace professionals, right? And in many cases, you only pay $75 for the whole summer academy because it is nonprofit sponsored. So if your children are interested in aviation, not only can they have this beautiful experience, but OBAP also helps with scholarships for going into aviation careers if they'd like to become, could be an aviation mechanic, a pilot, on a private level or a commercial level. Being involved with the aviation community in Houston, for example, that's where I'm from, is Houston. There's an airport there called Millionaire, and I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but Millionaire is like where the celebrities land, the Beyoncés and the Jay-Z's and the pro football players and pro basketball players and John Legend. And you have these young African Americans that are like 19, 20, 21 years old that have got their private pilot certification. And they're the ones who are flying these celebrities, and they're starting out at this very young age, making $40K to $60K a year with no college degrees because they got their private pilot's license. They're in there, how do you say, like, rubbing shoulders with, these celebrities that they're able to take these Instagram pics with and everything and show it to their friends and making good money in the progress without having a college degree. And those are the opportunities that are appealing to our children, no matter what hood they're in, so to say, right? They do not have to be in a middle class Black family, to appreciate being able to fly Jay-Z around and make money doing it, So those are the types of opportunities we want to present. You can see here, these are the places where the ACE academies are located. You can see here on the map that it's literally across the country: Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Florida, Houston, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Louisville, Richmond, Twin Cities, all across the country. So just finding one that's closest to you if your children are interested in that path, and get them enrolled, get them participating, at least in an info session, so that they can add that to their list of choices, of what they may want to do. Watching films together is great, right? Now, if you're not familiar with Films for Action, then definitely check out that website, filmsforaction.org. And if we have time, I'll actually show you the website at the end. Netflix, you definitely need parent monitoring for that. Going to your community library. The California Newsreel series of Francophone African films is really good. There were some films that I really enjoyed in there. Like there was one called in English it translated to Africa I Will Pluck You, but I think it's Afrique Je Te Plumer, if I remember correctly. But you can look it up online. In English, the translation is Africa I Will Pluck You, and that's a film by, if I remember correctly, the Cameroonian filmmaker John Marie Tino. And he really gives the history of some of the travesties that have happened in West Africa because of Europeans. You know, some things that you and your children may not be familiar with already, right? So, for example, within that film, he talks about how they basically disenfranchised African publishers so that they could not publish school books for the children, and they were forced to continue to use the French curriculum, right? And the details of that are given within that film. There was another really good one called Silence de la Forêt, Silence of the Forest. And that one has, I think you pronounce his name, Eric Ubiani, if I'm saying it correctly, but that was a beautiful film about the people who we call the pygmy people. And, you know, of course, that's not their indigenous name. It's not coming to me just at this moment. Like it's right there on the tip of my tongue. But it's an incredible film. Thank you so much. It's an incredible film, Silence of the Forest in English, but, you know, in French it's Silence de la Forêt, if I remember correctly. And it shows how he basically tried to go into their communities, the main character, to try to force them to do things the white way, because that was how he had been taught, you know. And he got into some trouble, let's just say that. And you can see what kind of trouble he got into if you watch the film. It's an excellent film. So it just gives our children something different. You know, if you go into those Francophone African films and so on, and not just watching, you know, our historical films, African Americans, but also introducing them to filmmaking from a Pan-African perspective, right? They have those at the library, or you can find them on Amazon Prime and some of the other resources online. Feel Rich, you know, of course, that one's on YouTube with Sick Man. The Black Power mixtape, 500 years later, Marcus Garvey Look for Me in the Whirlwind, Chisholm 72, Unbought and Unbossed. You know, these are all great films. 13, you know, and even in terms of thinking about how we're moving forward as a world collectively, looking at movies like Edible City, Schooling the World, you know, In Transition 2.0, the story of resilience and hopes in extraordinary times, The Economics of Happiness. And all of those films are available to watch on filmsforaction.org. It's like a free Netflix for like documentaries, you know. Only the new films have a donation associated with them for the most part. Now on Academy, your children can learn JavaScript, Python. My son mainly programs in Python. They can learn to make websites. You know, most of the lessons on Khan Academy are free. Brother Sutek, did you have something to share? If not, can you mute your microphone, please? Okay. Now, I mentioned Scratch, and with Scratch, they'll learn computer programming, video game design, animation, and digital storytelling. And that's at scratch.mit.edu, and it's completely free. My son started using Scratch when he was 5, and he just kept getting more advanced from there once he learned how to teach himself coding, which is a service that Scratch provides for free. It's sponsored by MIT, which we're all familiar with, right? These are more resources. You know, we talked about Scratch. In terms of looking at those kits, right? I saw that a few of you mentioned being interested in the various kits that are available. And let me see if I can just show you really quickly. If you go to Alinko, and I'll just pull it up here. Alinko is a website for educational STEM toys. Okay, now the thing about Alinko is that you can either purchase their materials within like your local stores, and you can contact them to find out, you know, where you can buy, or you can look here on the site to see where to buy these various kits like solar power. Oh, it clicked off. Started going to a quote by Amy Garvey, which would probably also be great. I'm sure that would be great too. So you can look at where to buy, to find the place to find these kits in your area. If you want to get like a solar power, water purification kit. Let's just look up solar here, electronic engineering. With SNAP circuits, your children can start learning electronic engineering, you know, really early, right? Robotics, you know, all of those things are available through Alinko. Now, the great thing is this can also be a different type of empowerment for your family. If you have a business, you can create a wholesale account with Alinko, and you can order their products at a wholesale price and sell them to other homeschooling parents in your community and be able to earn money from home for your family, right? I have a wholesale account. I do sell these things, and I could just tell you to buy it from me, right? But we're all in different areas. We all have different target markets. And so I want to share that resource with you so that you can empower yourself and your family. I can tell you this kit is like $7.95 wholesale. So even if you just want to buy it at a lower price, like for yourself, for your family, you can do that, you know. But if you want to make some money, then, you know, you would be making around, you know, $12 or so, like from that solar kit, the 6-in-1. And some of them you make even greater, you know, profit from them. The robotics kits and everything, you know, they're all here as well. And so definitely look through these, you know, like go to the Alinko store, you know, online, you know, sign up for a wholesale account, you know, if you have a business, you know, provide those resources in your community, and also provide them for your own family, because these are the types of things that our children need to be learning at an early age, you know, how to put things together, how to use technology. They have chemistry kits here as well, microscopes, telescopes, like literally hundreds of things. And, you know, these things are very important for, you know, how our children grow and develop into the future, right? And so let me see if I can just go back to the presentation here. We were much farther along than this. Does anyone have a question while I get back to where we were in the presentation? Okay, then I'll check the chat box for questions shortly. Let me just go back here for a second. So in terms of homeschool co-ops, well, first, the ideas, okay, for Brother Taharka, who asked about offline activities, swimming at your local community pool, playing chess, visiting museums and workshops, you know, doing cooking lessons with your children, you know, showing them how to make the things you know how to make. It does not have to be gourmet. Most of our children don't know how to make eggs, you know, like they don't know how to make pancakes, you know, spaghetti, right? If we haven't taught them already. And so just those basic things, like this is how to make the best grilled cheese sandwich, you know, I know how to make. You know, show them that, you know, you don't have to be a gourmet chef to teach your children about cooking. You know, just teach them how to make everything that you know how to make. Okay. Feeding the homeless. Like my son and I, we joined an organization in Houston called Food Not Bombs, where we prepared vegetarian and vegan meals for the homeless like 4 days a week during a certain time period when we were there. We actually moved to Belize in 2016. We also participated in Feed the Hood, which, is through NBUF, National Black United Front. And that was on, like, I think it was one Saturday per month, at that time. And we would take different non-perishables along with some perishables like almonds and fruit and so on, and pass those out within our community of Third Ward, Houston. So it cultivated him a different way. And of course, I think Sister Nikki mentioned international travel. We've definitely been blessed in terms of, creating international experiences. If you know my bio, you know that I've traveled to about 12 countries so far, and my son has been to most of those countries with me. And that has been in the vein of doing a lot of human rights work. I did 7 trips to Haiti, and I think, Josep, did you go to Haiti with me 4 or 5 times? He did most of those trips with me in any case. And those trips were for different projects. We did reforestation. I was actually the coordinator for the medical service trips for the University of Houston, at one time. And so we were bringing down doctors and nurses to provide emergency care to people who were in tent cities in Haiti. We were able to implement holistic measures within that as well, such as the planting of moringa trees, doing water purification to prevent parasites and so on, right? Yeah, you do have moringa. So my niece just brought me some moringa from outside as an illustration. Thank you so much, BB. So moringa, if you're not familiar with it, you eat about this much of it. I'm so glad she brought me this. I can show it to you. You eat about this much of it. It gives you all the nutrition that you need for the whole day. Vitamin A, vitamin C, protein, all the nutrition that you need for the whole day. And it grows very quickly. And so it is a solution for malnutrition in what we call developing countries, right? Or countries that have been underdeveloped by European people globally. So we planted and had planted, through funding it, thousands of, moringa trees in Haiti, but that's something that I would like to see done in other countries where our people are as well, right? You can look up the work that I've done online. I'm not going to get so much into it, but what I want to share with you from that is that my son was able to have those international experiences. And if you want your children to have international experiences, I'll show you in a moment an organization that you can go through. I'll tell you now in case we run out of time. Experiment in International Learning. Experiment in International Learning. Look that up. They do provide full scholarships for international experiences for our children. So you can do that starting in the 9th grade, in terms of going through them. Coming into high school and college, you can start looking into the critical language scholarship. And, that one also is a full scholarship. And, your children can go to Tanzania and study Swahili for the summer, for example. If your children want to go to, well, not Spanish in Tanzania, baby. So if they want to go to Tanzania and study Swahili for the summer, they can do that with the critical scholarship. If they want to go to Tanzania and chill with the retired Black Panthers out there, then look up Experiment in International Learning. I've had several of my students who have gone through them and had great experiences. Aya Educational Institute, which is run by the Mazamoyos, also provides study abroad experiences for our children as well. And that's where we kind of segue back into homeschool co-ops, whether that be online or in person. Aya Educational Institute has an online co-op that has an in-person study abroad component. They did a trip to Cuba, for example, to introduce our children to the indigenous culture there, as well as giving them the academic experience. in terms of homeschool co-ops, that's where my homeschool journey started back when my son was 5. You know, this is him when he was 5, Hotep with this blue jacket on, with his little friends. Now he's all tall with long locks. But, you know, this was back then. And so he started at the beginning of the first grade year. And I was making like $600 a month at that time. Like I was like not doing well financially because I was in college full time and I was creating my schedule around what my son needed. But everything worked out, you know, like where I was staying was very affordable. You know, it was with an artist organization called Project Row Houses in Houston. And, you know, they admitted me as an artist and mother to, you know, pay $75 a month for rent while I was there, with their, you know, and give me studio space, you know, for my painting and so on. And there are programs like that across the country. With the co-op, it was supposed to be $400 a month, but I taught math and yoga and art classes, and you know, he was able to attend for free because I was teaching, right? And so it's not about how much money you have, you know, it's also about the wealth that you carry inside of you, right? And so if you can take a way to take that wealth inside of you and use that to resituate your life in alignment with what your children need, then you won't need as much money to be able to provide these types of experiences to your children. Okay, now you still decide what you want your children to learn within a co-op, but you may not be teaching or guiding in all of these subjects. You work with other parents to provide a collective education to your children. You plan at the beginning of the semester or the school year, and then you go through that plan over the course of the year, and you can even do that on an online platform, right? Now, if you need to work, you know, part-time, you may leave your child with other parents for a certain amount of hours each day, even if it's not in a co-op. It might just be your friend you trust, right? And when they're over your friend's house that you trust, they're doing independent reading and math worksheets. And then when you go pick them up, then you're doing some other type of work with them and you balance it, you carry it like that. It definitely takes a village for us to educate our children. Or you might work full time and you pay for your child to go to a co-op full time, or you know, pay other parents to teach your children within those subjects, right? When you have children on the junior high school level and the high school level, they can do many things independently. And so let them do part of their work independently, and then you can work with them for part of the day when, you know, you get off work or, you know, whatever may have you, right? Use the online tools that are available to you even within your co-op, you know, those building kits, those technologies, you know, learning things that prepare them, you know, for the 21st century, for where we're going in 2030 in terms of renewable energy. Let them learn about stocks, let them learn about cryptocurrency, you know, incorporate all of these things into your curriculum, which means, of course, you first have to learn about them yourself, you know, and then use some of the things that you're learning to create goals financially to take those trips to the motherland. You know, maybe you want to go to Tanzania or Ethiopia, you know, or to Kemet, you know, and you can put that money together with your children by teaching them entrepreneurship, either alone or within a collective, right? You can mix it up, you know, and do a combination of both. You know, engage with classes being offered. Most museums across the US offer free days for children, right? So incorporate those into your homeschooling curriculum. Organizations like Sky Zone, where they have all the giant trampolines, they do free homeschool days too, you know, in terms of just having fun. I was so surprised when I started homeschooling and I realized like there's this whole world that we didn't have access to when my son was in public school. I'm like, we can go jump on trampolines at 1 o'clock in the afternoon for free, you know, like this is a thing, you know, and with other children that look like us, like we could do this within our community. Like what have we been doing this whole time? Go ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but
yes,
our time for this session has expired.
Oh, I thought we were gonna get a warning.
I would. That's my apologies. I'll put them in the chat. I assume that you guys saw them.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see them in the chat yet. Can we have like 2 minutes to wrap up?
That's fine.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through and just show you the rest of the slides. You know, check in your area. Duolingo, your children can learn Swahili for free. These are some ways to make money while homeschooling. You'll see all of this in the recording of the presentation. These are other ways that you can make money while homeschooling, okay? This is a little bit about my journey. Here are some free online tools you can use. Here are more resources, more resources. You can definitely DIY your homeschool. Here are more resources, and there's Experience in International Learning, the company I was telling you about to study abroad. And this is the co-op that me and some other teachers are running this school year, you know, and ongoing moving forward, which you can find out more about at wholelivingacademy.com. There is a free component, so you don't have to worry about cost. You know, there's an entry level for everyone. SEAMallyear.com. With that program I put together last year, the children can participate in STEAM enrichment all year. And there's a free component to that as well, and AfricanCenteredHomeschool.com. And then the last thing that I just want to quickly overview with you all in the minute that we have left, I said that I would share with you the different schools that are available. And so I'm just going to scroll through this quickly so that it will be recorded within the presentation for you to view it later. So I shared with you SEAM All Year, Mali Academy for pre-K through 8, Aya Educational Institute. They have an online component as well as being in Atlanta. Soil, run by Brother Supreme Understanding in Atlanta. Kilambo in Atlanta. Black Star Educational Institute. Urban Village Academy. Pearl Academy. Freedom Home Academy International out of Chicago. A lot of these schools have online components now. Betty Shabazz International Charter School. Seneca Village Montessori is an African-centered preschool. God's in the Tray, which is not here, is also an African-centered preschool. Little Sun People. Marcus Garvey School in Los Angeles. Nation House. Sankofa Homeschool Community up in the DMV area with Monica Uzzy. Timbuktu Academy. Sankofa Academy out of Houston. I do have Gods in the Tray here, godsinthetray.com. That has an online component too for the preschool students. Prince Circle of Legends, Know Thyself Academy. And then for studying abroad, there's a group of African-centered schools on the continent that you can check out at aschools.online and, you know, give them an opportunity to go abroad and participate with that as well. Okay, so we are out of time, but my name is Nikala Asante, Nikala Asante. So you can message me on Facebook, Instagram, you know, whatever medium that you use, or you can email me at info@wholelivingacademy.com with any questions that you have. And I'll check in the chat box as well, you know, and see if I can send out some answers through Brother Kuji Chakalia. Very quickly, did anyone have any final comments in this last 30 seconds?
Thanks for the lesson and the resources.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well
thank
done.
you, Sister Nikki.
Well done.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Brother Saharka. Thank you. Okay, so I think you'll all be going into the next session now. Nikala Asante, if you need to reach me. And thank you all so much for participating in the RBG Centennial. Beautiful event. Soraya says she loves y'all.
We love you too.
They said they love you too, baby.
Most definitely.
Thank you.
Doc Maki. Buck front, yeah. Shot. Intro to O. And my dude, that Timbuktu the Ave. Renew your passion, shun the condition. And not the who, what, when, where, and you are from. At last. Put the higher